Hello, soul travelers. So I'm called to have like a little bit of a personal share here, and this is something that is not in my book. Um, it has not been shared on any interviews, and so it does contain sensitive material. I will share that, so that's why I had to put trigger warning on that. So that being said, when I was young, around 5.5 to 6 years old, so it's somewhere in between there, um, I had a knowing of the trauma that I was going to endure in this lifetime. And I had this moment that felt so intense and profound, and I did not want to be here. So it's interesting because it's almost like coming from, a place like when you're super young and born and you come into the world and um, you are unconditional love and light, here for a mission and all of that and purpose. And then, you start to fall back asleep with the programming and the densities and all of that. And so around 5.5, 6, and that was, and I will share, it was around the time some abuse was starting in my life. And um, I though, like I had this feeling and I'm like, whoa, what did I sign up for? End this contract. And so I um, could remember that young a past life from Japan. And this past life has come up over and over again on my journey. And it's just one of many, as I'm sure you guys have too many memories of past lives. Some are, fun and magical, and others are a little bit heavier, and some fall in between. And they're all relevant and important in our journey to bring that memory forward to help us remember who we are and to, make that journey home to the heart. And so the past life that I remembered as a samurai was one where we were trained and taught to honorably be discharged from this life. You take the sword to the heart. So I remembered that information super young. Was it anything I was taught in this lifetime? Of course, later on in my journey, came across that information. But at that time, it was just a knowing. And so I went into the kitchen and pulled out a knife. And I went back, and this was in my parents' bedroom. And I was sitting on the side of the bed, and I remember like, kind of like, breathing and like preparing myself. And I would count 1, 2, 3. Um, and I did that a couple of times as count because I was working sort of up the courage. And this is something that I didn't realize until later on, but my Andromeda guide Pat 2 was around back then and somehow energetically alerted my mom. And she came in to the room and I could hear her coming down the hallway. So I took that and I threw it in the closet. I knew, that was something that could get me in trouble. And I wasn't even sure at that age, like what to explain or say about that. And so, fast forward to later on in the journey, and those same feelings came forward, other times on my journey. And so there was inspired action, that was taken again later on. And and the same thing, I moved through that experience. I was able to wake up from a specific experience, and that one I do talk about in my book. And and I knew after that, like, yes, I am supposed to be here. Have had other moments like brushes with death that weren't something, or wasn't something that I was trying to take control in my own hands. That just happened, and it was like one of those moments. Oh, you know, um, how am I still here and existing? So kind of like a cat with nine lives. And um, and anyways, long story short, there is sort of this dark side. I often channel uh, the messages of love, support, encouragement from all of our beautiful soul families and uh, allies. Um, but there are, waves of not wanting to be here that can come, especially for star seeds and or just, being a human in this existence. And so it can get really challenging. And and I just want to acknowledge that and just send love to anyone who's been moving through those experiences now. Just that you are so meant to be here. I mean, you wouldn't even exist if there was no purpose. There's certainly a purpose if you need help feeling that, because, part of the purpose is to be you, to live, to have joy. It's part of the inner alchemical process that we go through to harmonize and balance. And there are sensitivities to what's happening in the world around you, of course, too. But I'd love to encourage and support people on their process just because I can relate, so deeply and compassionately to those feelings. And so one day I asked the guides, and so I'm not saying that this is for everyone, this specific response, but this is what they told me. Okay. So I wrote, and I will say too, like I want to touch on one other thing. So I had these, moments throughout life, and then there was a shift, right? So this was like we're going back, maybe like 7 or 8 years now, I think it is. And so after that shift, um, that's when things like I felt very determined to be here and an understanding of the feelings that were occurring. And so, anyways, I asked, Dear angels, elders, and star family, why do we encounter waves of not wanting to be here? And their response at the time was because our soul knows we have to do this work ourselves, that it is in our own hands. When we are able to tap into that process in its entirety, at even a quick glimpse, the magnitude of such a shift feels completely overwhelming to our systems, our internal systems. We have thereby felt defeated before we have even completed that journey. And so I share that because I remember like pretty early on in my journey, and I was having a tough time back then. And, there was this guy on the corner, and he was playing his guitar, and the lyrics I remember just like played out and kind of haunted me because I knew that it was true. And it was, it's gonna be a long, long time. And this was years ago, but what I started to understand is that this ascension process was not an overnight process, and that there are waves, and um, these waves are different parts of that journey, of course, and we are collectively experiencing a lot of that. But it also impacts us each individually and uniquely, depending on what's transpiring or unfolding in our lives. And so ascension carrots are like little nuggets of like the next sort of step. And so I've said this before on my videos, it's not to focus on the future and take us out of the present, but just to acknowledge that um, there are little moments that will free up more energy. There's so much beauty to look for, to feel, to experience. And if you're in any part of that process, just to know that you're always exactly where you're supposed to be. um, and we're coming to a space now. I work with people every day. I'm doing um, well, I want to say I do different offerings, but ultimately they all have the same goal, which is to empower, to support, to guide people back to themselves, back to their heart, to help expand consciousness, to help raise frequency. I love doing it. I do it in different ways. I love working with your individual gifts and exploration of such. But yeah, so I'm sharing this because, I don't know exactly who watches these videos on this page, but there are people who are at just different stages of their evolution. And um, if you're feeling, any of the challenges, even though, sometimes we're super tapped in and we can feel super strong and like we're in this God consciousness, or Christ consciousness, uh, different parts of this like superhero journey. But sometimes it's challenging. So if you're feeling that, you are alone. So just wanted to share that and send so much love.